For those of you who I may never meet, I try and share a little bit about who I am and my story. Obviously, if you watch Survivor, you will come to your own conclusions about who I am. And what you see is real. You know, it's unscripted drama, and the footage is of me. But I'm a more rounded, fat too, but more rounded personality-wise guy than might be represented on the show. I'm a guy who grew up, one of 4 kids and then 7 later when my dad remarried, in Newport, Rhode Island. I've lived there and love the whole area for a long, long time. I'm well-traveled, traveled the world, went to college in Florida and New York and Rhode Island. I have degrees in applied behavioral sciences and management. I've got my master's in education and counseling. I've done most of my PhD work in humanities. I'm a scuba instructor. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love my dogs. I love camping. I love hiking. I love the mountains. I love fresh air. I love being away from people because you people drive me nuts. What is it about that? People, for me, have always been fascinating. But I have a real tough time with superficiality and not getting at something below that surface, meaningfully engaging with folks. So for things like parties and hanging, and I can do it, and I'm adept. I understand that people need a little bit of that to be comfortable. But if there isn't something deeper, something more meaningful below that surface, something we'll spend the majority of our time doing that means something, it's really not for me. Life's too short, and there's a lot going on in all of us. And exploring that, working toward being happy in real ways, that's kind of who I am. People ask what my childhood was like, and it's really tough to have perspective. Even at this age, as I've learned much about many other people, I don't know where my childhood fits into others. I think I'm likely more similar than different. There was a lot of suffering. There were many challenges that I think most Americans endure. I'm from a home of parents who divorced when I was 11. There was a lot of animosity in the house that I recall. There wasn't a lot of love expressed, probably felt. I'm sure my parents did the best they knew how to do, but they certainly did not know how to express love and feel and communicate that love to their children in ways that their children could feel loved. And that impacted all of our lives, all of my siblings' lives, in very obvious and palpable ways. There were 4 of us. I'm the oldest of 4 in the original family, and then my dad remarried and I had 3 more kids. From a small-ish town in Rhode Island, grew up in Middletown. People know it as Newport. There's an island called Aquidneck Island, and there are 3 towns on it: Newport, Middletown, and Portsmouth. Newport is by far the most well-known, and so I talk about being from Newport, Rhode Island. I grew up on the beach, body surfing in waves, and my dad was a lobsterman and a cop, and worked at a scientific laboratory too. And so I spent a lot of time in the ocean, spearfishing and playing, and really, really love everything ocean related. I was kind of a go-getter, pretty academic guy. My brother, who was a couple of years younger than me, wasn't. He was bright, good, pretty decent student, but more an athlete. And so there was that dichotomy. He was the sports guy, and I was the student. And there was rivalry, and whatever would be between brothers. When I was 15 and he was 13, he was run over and killed by a car on West Main Road by a drunk driver. They found the largest amount of cocaine ever found in Rhode Island in the trunk of the car, and the guy was let off because they didn't have a warrant when they opened the trunk. Crazy. Interesting that early to have that kind of a powerful impact in your life. One of the things it did to me was it caused me to be aware and questioning and introspective very, very early. So I thought a lot about what's real and who are we and all this stuff with respect to religion that kind of intrigued me for a long, long, long time as a result of that. And I'm grateful for that kind of thought. I'm sad at how much I think we would have had a great relationship at this stage of our lives, but so be it. That's life. And his name was Kenny. And, challenging. After 15, I was a handful for my parents. I don't like superficiality, like I said, and I was very challenging to them. And I did my thing and figured out who I was. Growing up gay in a very, very homophobic world was strengthening in odd ways. It taught me early to care less about what other people think. And it taught me early that adults aren't better somehow, aren't brighter somehow, just because they've been on the planet longer. It taught me how few people are introspective enough and think enough about their impact on others to be good, caring human beings. And so I work to be something other than what I learned adults were as a kid. Who was I in high school? Wow. I was not a jock. I was not a cool kid. My friends were girls, mostly, and I was very, very shy. In 6th grade, I remember having to shower with other guys, and I was so nervous, such a wreck about being naked, and this might be some foretelling of why I am who I am today. I remember going into the gym coach made us, and it kind of forced me intentionally, I think. At one point, I put my head under the sink to wet my hair to make him think I'd showered, and he caught me, and that was humiliating, and he made me shower. And I remember one of the kids, a short kid, a kind of friend, turned to me and was laughing and peed on my leg, and laughed. It was so humiliating. And when I think back, I realized this was boys being boys, and he really wasn't a mean kid, and I got to know him later. But it was so impactful, and it didn't do anything, frankly, to help me get over my discomfort with my own body and my fear of being naked around guys. Part of which I'm sure had to do with being gay and not knowing whether I'd get an erection or whatever else. Who knows? But I know a lot of kids have that angst. I guess probably today's world, maybe they have separate showers, I don't know. But that was a real powerful part of my life, that whole who I felt about myself thing, and connecting with boys as comrades and friends wasn't as easy for me as was connecting with girls. Books was my thing. I really wanted to do well, and I tried to get great grades. Early on, I learned that I was bothered by the way people thought about one another, and I found value in diversity. It was not a common thing in my neighborhood or my world, really, at that time. Rhode Island is conservative and small, and there's a lot of what I think of as religious bigotry, or there was. And I took a black girl to my senior prom, and I remember my grandfather disowning me. My grandfather, a pillar of the community, he and my grandmother, and I have wonderful relationships with them. I was closer to my grandmother than anyone in the world, but yeesh. I knew that there were flaws in these adults' thinking, and I understood that they didn't get a lot that was harmful, destructive, unkind, all kinds of things that aren't adjectives that others would paint people, adults and people in my family with. But I knew that to be true. And so I wrestled with what to do about that. And I knew getting out of my town was a big, big, important thing to do. Oddly, I didn't know myself well enough to not get engaged, and I got engaged. Shortly after I was engaged to this woman who I took to every prom, every dance in school other than my senior prom, I left town and joined the Army. Bye! Didn't even say anything to anyone, just left and thought, ooh, I gotta go. Went to Boston to the recruiters and ended up being flown to El Paso, Texas for basic training. And I had really great experience, interesting experiences then too. I want to do right, I want to do well, I want to be, but I wasn't the jock. So I worked hard to do what was expected and to take the drill sergeant's taunting but it was tough. I didn't understand the world very well then. There were a lot of guys who just wanted to get high and kind of hanging out, and I didn't get it. I was like, wait, we got to clean our boots. I was a dork. I mean, a real weird, nerdy dork. And as I got more comfortable with myself, I appreciated the parts of me that were kind of dorkish, but I didn't need to denigrate or to dislike others who weren't. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of figuring out that kindness and being open to whomever it is you encounter is the best way to be happy, is the best way to participate in this world. Here I am, what was I, 19 when I joined? And so early 20s, still kind of figuring out who I am. And I remember being stationed in Georgia and being really, really attracted to this guy in my unit. And I think he's straight. I think he was straight then, but he was so relaxed and kind of open, and he would love to wrestle and stuff. And wow, it was crazy. Figuring out who you are and kind of living in this world where everyone thinks you're straight is not an easy thing to do. And you're trying to be yourself and you're trying to be open and honest, but you can't be in the military if you're gay, and you know that people don't accept gay people in the world and in America at that time. This was 1980. So challenges. I remember challenges being part of the Army. I was a Vulcan assistant gunner. That's an air defense artillery tank, and that's how I ended up going in so quickly. I didn't care. I had the education and the ability to have what people thought of as better jobs, but I just wanted what was available that day, and poof, off I went. So I was a Vulcan artilleryman, an assistant gunner on a Vulcan tank. And, after doing that job for some time, people thought I could do other things, and my commander made me a supply clerk. And, by that time thereafter, I'd applied to West Point and moved on to a different chapter in my life. At West Point, it was still an interesting time. I ended up dating Miss New Jersey and doing some interesting things. I got to go all over the world. I went to Germany and for a summer exercise, and took over a tank platoon, and we did exercise in the middle of the night, and I'm one of the only platoons that made it through the fields and the exercise in the midst of fire and fireworks and all this to the end. So I felt proud of myself being able to read maps and launch grenades and shoot. I was an expert grenadesman, an expert rifleman, and these aren't things people often associate, or didn't at that time, with gay guys. And I think now the world knows we're everywhere and we're all kinds of people, and there aren't things that are just masculine that aren't part of being a gay man. And I've had a very interesting life, and it has led to my being who I am now. The Army was a really interesting chapter in my life, but when I finished my time in the Army, I moved into New York City. I knew no one, and I had, as an acquaintance, a West Point classmate's sister. She was a flight attendant. I thought, oh, I can share an apartment with her. And so I moved into New York City, and I looked for work, and I ended up working as a word processor for a company that then had me working selling drugs to doctors. So we were putting on seminars all over the world, and they would send me to take care of the wives while the husbands were being sold drugs that they would be asked to prescribe, etc. Crazy. It still goes on today, I think. I remember some of the companies' names, but I won't even talk about that. So I lived in New York City for a good while, and that was a fascinating experience. I was a bouncer at the Palladium, an awesome, huge club that was owned by Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager, the two folks who owned Studio 54. And I remember being their personal driver and Steve Rubell interviewing the bartenders in his hotel room. It was a really fascinating time in life. Steve Rubell has since died of AIDS, and Ian Schrager has gone on to be a hotelier around the world, built all kinds of hotels. But I remember he had me staying in his apartment for some period on 94th or 93rd in York. And gosh, the people to whom I was exposed at the Palladium. I was VIP manager for a while, and anybody and everybody you can think of, Jack Nicholson, Mick Jagger, Bianca Jagger, I mean, they were all, Jane Fonda, coming in, and I was having conversations with them, getting them what they needed, bringing them up to the Mike Todd room, a very private, comfortable room. And it was another fascinating chapter in my search for who we are as humans, because none of them were anything other than people. They're just people who had some level of fame that enabled them to live in ways that others admired or thought that they would admire. Mostly it's about wealth. I got to work the door on Sunday nights. That was gay night. And so by working the door, I got to select who it was that came in or didn't. And it was fascinating, the ways in which people would encourage me to select them. Boy, did I have a lot of sex during those years. Right behind the curtain as soon as I let them in, on the stairwells, in back. I mean, it was really, really a crazy, crazy time in my life. I went on from there to go back to school. I wanted to continue my degrees and moved to Fairfax, Virginia, went to George Mason University. Graduated when I was in DC with my bachelor's in applied behavioral sciences and management before moving back to Newport, Rhode Island. Survivor came on the radar unknown to me by my mom saying something to the effect of they're putting together a show just for you. She had no idea who, she had no idea what it was really, but she thought, oh, this would be right up my alley. She had all kinds of ideas often for what I could and should do. But a week after that, another woman, a friend of mine in DC, wrote to me and said, CBS is putting together a show just for you. And I thought, oh, this is weird. My mother, who doesn't know Kathleen, and Kathleen's saying this. So I looked into it, and the rest is history. I filled out the application, and here I sit. And they were right. My background in academics had to do with who we are as people, and I'm an outdoorsman, camping and hiking and all the rest of it. So when they thought the show was just for me, they were right. Hey, you! Yeah, you! Watching the video, you thought it was over. No, you got a job to do. Click the like button and subscribe right below. Come on, get on it now. And feel free to comment. Go ahead, tell me how arrogant I am. Tell me how much you can't stand this or that. I'll listen. Comment away.